Nate, you want to come up here and we'll go into the discussion about the FY25 budget development. This is our fourth time meeting about this as a whole board, and we are narrowing into the close here, meaning that we will be going to City Council on January 16th and then coming to the board meeting on that same night. Because it's MLK Day, City Council is not meeting until that Tuesday. They don't actually approve the budget. You all approve the budget, but we do present it to them every year so that they're fully informed and understand the direction we're headed, and so that we're collaborating and working together. So anyway, second to last board meeting on budget. And thanks for sticking with us. I know it's hard to have two big topics in one day, in one evening, but this one's really important. So our budget presentation, let's see, what am I going to do? I'll probably call out slides as people are following along, since we're not able to present tonight, and we will get that fixed for future board meetings. Hasn't happened before. I'm not sure why it's happening tonight, but we'll work through it. So our presentation tonight includes quite a bit of detail. Are you sure you all don't want this computer? Because I can log on with Nate. Yeah. Thanks, Gretchen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what I was saying.
Yeah. Let me, I don't know. Slide you for you?
Thank you.
There you go. Yep. All right. Okay, so if we move to some of the content is, we're on slide 2 now on the agenda, and some of the content in here has been in multiple presentations, so we're not going to go through every slide. I'm going to move quickly. This deck does go through quite a bit of detail about why we are where we are in the process, and gives a recommendation that I'm making to you all as in one of 5 scenarios here. So slide 3 is information you've seen before. Slide 4 is the enrollment information. And this just shows us that what the budget process that we've developed, the equitable budgeting process, assumes that enrollment is going to drive core staffing. So what you see here is that enrollment has been declining in Burlington schools over the past 10 plus years. And we want to do everything we can to keep families in our city and to bring families into our city with school-age children. So we are working on that, and I think some of the stuff that we just talked about helps us do more of that. But this is where we are right now. So enrollment drives core staffing. It's been declining for a number of years, and we have made incremental reductions to core staffing over the past 3 years, and we'll continue to do that in response, either reductions or additions to enrollment trends. But we also have the same number of schools, and so overall staffing can't change drastically while we still have 11 schools. And so we want to continue to build enrollment, but that's the picture of where we are right now. Slides 5 and 6 and 7 show you and speak to the development of the equitable budgeting process. And slide 6 particularly shows the robust response we had in a community survey that supported a task force in developing this equitable budgeting model. Slide 8 shows you the model, which includes a core staffing, which is core staffing based on research that we did in Vermont, the Vermont standards, education standards, in national associations recommendations. So there's a national association recommendation from the School Counselors Association. That's a 250 to 1 recommendation. And so it's a research-based, and it's a robust core staffing model. We wanted to make sure that was clear to people because sometimes it sounds like, oh, it's just the core staffing model, but actually our core staffing model includes really low student-to-teacher ratios, 14-to-1 at the elementary school level, which is great, but that's our core model. That doesn't mean every classroom is 14-to-1, but that's when you aggregate across the district. We have really low student-to-teacher ratios here in Burlington. And so it's a robust core model. And then the RISE allocation is the equitable allocation of funding using the weighted pupil to give specific funding to schools, for schools to be able to make school-level decisions with their school advisory groups. And that's a process that we've been working through with our schools over the past couple of years. This is a new process, so we get better at it each year. And so that's the model. And then for some reason I can't, okay. All right, so Nate's going to talk about the specifics of the bond and the impacts of, I'm going to talk about board guidance. So we were using board guidance. So the board developed this guidance. This builds off of guidance that the Finance and Facilities Committee last year developed and brought to the board, and then brought back to the Finance and Facilities Committee at the beginning of this year to guide our decision-making process, and then came back to the full board again this year to guide our approach to the budget. And so this has informed, even post-CLA, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This has really guided our development. It's been very helpful for us to have this from you as we build our budgets. Okay, Nate.
Okay, so now we get into the new content here, really, which is slide 10. One of the things that has come up in a few different settings is just what the impact is of the borrowing associated with the BHS BTC building project, particularly now that that project's transitioning to an actual building project as opposed to just a demolition project. So first of all, we've borrowed the majority of that money now, 130 of the $165 million voter authorization. We have, so we have that money in our accounts. We haven't spent nearly all of it, but we have it on hand because we're now entering the period of time with the construction where we're going to start spending that money much more rapidly. Because of that, the biggest impact that we're going to feel in terms of a year-over-year impact is for the budget year that we're talking about right now, FY25, the year coming up, right? We've just borrowed all that money, and just like another debt, we're going to have to start paying that money back, and we're going to feel that for the first time in earnest in fiscal year 25. And even though every successive year until the debt's retired, we'll continue to pay that money back, we're not going to have the big jump in debt service that we're going to have between this year and next year. If we end up borrowing the full $165 million, we estimate at this point, kind of holding all else constant, that tax rates would go up by another 2.8% or so. So we've already kind of embedded most of that increase in the budget proposal that is before you tonight. Remaining borrowing also, as the slide said, likely to occur over a couple of years because just of the timing of the project and when we'll need the money. We don't need to borrow it before necessary. That would also just, again, make that 2.8% might only be, let's say, 1.4% in each of 2 years. But that is to be determined and based on changes in the project schedule. So the other thing we want to talk about was the tax cap that's part of Act 127. So we've talked about it a little bit, but a few pieces that might sound technical now but are really relevant to understand is that the cap was put in place, really to help those communities who were going to experience likely tax increases as a result of the changes to the way we weight pupils, specifically moving to long-term weighted ADM. The idea was that those communities should have a little bit of a kind of a glide path to be able to adjust their expenditures to the new financial system in the state so that they didn't get kind of hammered in 1 year with a dramatic tax increase. However, there's probably a lot of other communities, including our own, that are going to find themselves taking advantage of that tax cap. And one important thing to understand about that cap is it applies before the CLA. So as we move on to the next slides and we talk about the CLA, we should understand that the cap is in the process. It comes into play and limits the increase in the tax rate before the CLA. and then the impact of the CLA, irrespective of whether it's up or down, is on the basis of that capped rate. So another feature of it, I think I've mentioned this, if you exceed the 5% growth in or increase in tax rate and therefore you're capped at 5%, you may be reviewed by the state if your growth essentially in spending per pupil increases by more than 10%. That's not quite technically accurate. What it really is your growth in spending per long-term weighted ADM, which is the new metric, replacing equalized pupil, so it's hard to compare apples to apples. I think for the purposes of decision-making, we should all understand that BSD is almost certainly going to trigger that review under any plausible scenario. So rather than getting too technical, just understand we will be subject to that review, and my presumption would be that we would pass that review, meaning that we would be able to retain eligibility for the tax cap, because we can clearly show, as we'll show in other slides, that the vast majority of our net spending increase is being driven by the debt service associated with building a new high school. So that would seem to me like a very defensible reason. There's no published criteria. It's an agency of education responsibility to review that, and so we don't yet know how that will take place, but that's as much as we do know. Okay, so the other place, that, as I mentioned, the cap applying before the equalized rate, and as we dive into the CLA, I think it's important to understand that in any budget scenario where we hit that tax cap, and therefore prior to the CLA, what's called our equalized tax rate is capped at 5%, that means that the post CLA tax rate is going to be about 14%. So whether we were in a situation where our pre-CLA tax rate was 5.25%, or 10.25%, or 20.25%, but it doesn't matter what it is, you're capped at 5%. But then when you add the impact of the CLA, that tax rate increase becomes 14%, irrespective of how far over that cap you are. So the CLA, we keep talking about it, that's the common level of appraisal. This is slide 13. Here, we got information as the tax department released this information on January 3rd. We received it, and the CLA in Burlington went down by 7.87%. That is a big single-year decrease. Although hardly unprecedented, many of our neighboring communities had even larger decreases. What that means is that the property, the fair market value of property in Burlington is further divorced from the assessed value. It's much higher fair market value than the assessed value. And as a result of that, what we were initially estimating to be an 8% increase in the tax rate based on our kind of initial budget recommendations that we were planning to bring forward, then projected out to be on the order of like 17% increase. And we're going to talk about how we reacted to that in the different scenarios that we explored in the coming slides. Let me see, the last part on here that we should flag is the kind of last bullet on the slide. Because of the CLA, and because that's going to apply after the tax cap, it essentially means that the only way to reduce the tax rate, even down to single digits, as you'll see, is with a substantial reduction in FTEs and in positions across our schools. It's just it has such a huge impact. And you can roughly think of it as the CLA dropping by about 8% roughly drives the tax rate up by 8% or more under any scenario. Okay, so we've covered the high-level stuff here. We're going to switch to talking about the scenarios that we developed, including the scenario that the superintendent is recommending. And that slide, we're starting on slide 14 now.
So this talks about we decided to develop scenarios after the CLA came. Before the CLA came to us on January 1st or 2nd, we were feeling pretty good about the proposal and a 6 to 8% tax increase, and to be able to accomplish many of the strategic investments that we hoped to do, in addition to the bond and wages and benefits. So it's really frustrating to get the CLA, the common level of appraisal, after the amount of time that we all collectively spent on building the budget. And the fact that the CLA is something that seems so separate from a school budget, the difference between what houses in Burlington are appraised at versus what their actual worth is making a 10% change in our budget this year is really frustrating. And it is, we have been, will continue to advocate at a state level for changes that will provide us some level of relief here. And so what I did here is I created 5 scenarios that illustrate the impacts of different approaches after the CLA. And what they show is that there's no real difference, and Nate just talked about this, in the tax rate increase if we make changes to programmatic investments. And the only way, and this will make more sense when you look at the scenarios, that we get below a 10% tax increase after the CLA is to cut 50 FTEs, so 50 essentially teacher positions, which we know is not possible, right? And so that's the frustration, not the amount of time that we spent developing the budget, but the fact that the impact of this after that is really challenging. It is important to know, I can't move the slides, I don't know why, that we're not alone in this, so it doesn't help us necessarily to know that, but I do know of neighbors whose budgets are at 18%, of people in the Northeast Kingdom whose budgets are 15%. I talked to the Vermont Superintendents Association executive director who said everyone is feeling this to one extent or the other. And if you do want to dig into Act 127, you can find it, and it's actually a relatively, parts of it are interesting, and it is an important act, right? You all actually did the advocacy to get the weighted pupil passed. And so we don't want to undermine the hard work that this school board did along with school boards across the state to get a weighted pupil that was equitable. That was huge. If we didn't have that now, we'd be 20-something%. But the work that you all did was really significant in helping us in other districts. But the CLA, again, is on top of, is hitting us in ways that we just were not expecting across the state. So if you look at scenario 1, that shows you our original proposal before the CLA. And so you can see we made some operational investments that we'll discuss. The operational investments on the left-hand column are the same in each. These are things that we don't have a choice about. The programmatic investments are investments that we developed as a leadership team, as our district cabinet team, to work on and improve the work we're doing on our strategic plan and to make strategic investments there. And then the reductions are serious reductions we made. We thought hard. We made reductions based on, areas that we thought we could reduce. And some of these are also directly aligned to a couple of these are directly aligned to the core staffing model. So that's scenario 1. The summary of scenario 1 is slide 17, and that shows you just note on that slide, the 7.5 tax increase before the CLA. So we came in with a 7.5 tax increase before the CLA. We felt good about that, given the huge amount of bonding that we were going to need to do this year. But then you can see the 13.97% tax increase after the CLA. Again, this is due to the difference between the appraised values of homes in Burlington versus the actual values of homes, and has nothing to do with the school or school budgets. Sorry, you're clicking for me. Scenario 2 responds to the CLA. So what you see in scenario 2 is that we've essentially scaled back the programmatic investments. We knew that we had to do some scaling back so that people understood that we were taking the impact of the CLA seriously, and also because the cap that Nate mentioned a little bit ago lasts until fiscal year 29, but then the cap goes away. So we also don't want to create a cliff in a few years down the line. So we're also projecting sort of down the line. So scenario 2 details the and this is my recommended scenario. Given the impact of the CLA, this one does actually impact our ability to implement on some of the priority areas, but does maintain some of our work there as well. Slide 18 shows the summary of scenario 2, and what you can note there is that there's the same tax impact, 13.67%, which is the same as scenario 1 because of the 5% cap. 13.97, sorry, thank you. My notes are wrong. We do believe we will be eligible for the cap, which you heard before, and because the majority of our increase is due to the bond and wages and benefits. And so this one is my recommendation, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that's the case. If you look at slide 19, that shows the scenario, the impact on taxpayers in scenario 2. And so what this tells you is that if your household brings in less than $50,000 a year, this will have an 11% impact on your taxes, or $135 a year. If your household brings in $120,000 a year, it will have an 11% impact as well, but that number is $323 a year. If you bring in more than $128,000, you're going to be paying based on the value of your home. And on a $370,000 home, you'd be paying $841 more taxes next year, and which is about is that right, Nate? $67 a month. So that shows you the impact, and we can build this out more over the course of next week and over the weeks. If this is the direction we go, but I wanted you to see scenario 2. I didn't run out of battery power over there. Okay.
Ask a question, is that warranted? Like, just, is this something you can share to the average voter? Like,
Yeah, we can't take questions from the public right now. I'm sorry. We will be around to talk afterwards,
Great, okay.
but I can share that we will be sharing this out with the people afterwards. Yeah. Scenario 3, you can see scenario 3 on slide 20. I don't recommend scenario 3 because it includes reducing all programmatic investments, like the Magnet School Task Force recommendation, all of the Magnet School Task Force recommendation, and everything else that's in that middle column, without changing the impact on taxes with the cap. So if you look at 21, slide 21, it shows you that the actual cap tax rate is 13.97 again, so no change from slide 2. So I don't recommend that one because, again, no programmatic investments and no change in taxes. Scenario 4, these I do not recommend. I strongly do not recommend them, but I wanted to show you what we would need to do if we wanted to get below a 10% tax increase. And so this scenario 4 shows what it would take to get there. This gets us to 8%. It would require a major reduction in instructional staff that would not allow us to run the district. It would impact or reduce, it would mean we'd need to reduce 50 FTEs or 12% of our teachers. Scenario 4, the summary, is there, and so you can see that there. And scenario 5, I won't even get into. That just goes deeper. That gets us to 5%. That shows you the impact beyond scenario 4. So I'm going to skip down to slide 27. Slide 27 kind of digs into my recommendation a little bit more, and we attempt to illustrate the recommendation and the impact in that pie chart. And in that pie chart, you can see that the vast majority of the increase is related to bonding. And this is a one-time increase of this size. Nate mentioned earlier that the next year is projected to be about 2.8, we said, increase. And so this is really where we see the huge investment in this bonding here. And additionally, wages and benefits have increased in the region, in the state, in the country, and it's in line with how important we know our educators are and our need to stay competitive in the region. And so you see wages and benefits there. And we also have leases and operating costs. We're actually proposing a reduction, in operating costs, but you see the overall operating costs, and some of those include leases that we need to, that are necessary because we are no longer in our high school, and we had to scatter when we left our high school, and that led to costs. And so we're going to continue to fight for construction funding and for and pursuing our lawsuit, and every possible way we can try to find funding to provide to alleviate this over time. But right now, this shows you the impact of wages and benefits, bonding, and operating and lease costs, and you can see the kind of student-facing investments are very modest, and safety investments are very modest, some strategic plan investments and school leadership investments. And I'm recommending scenario 2 because it responds to the budget pressures in some of the reductions we've made to those investments. It minimizes the impact on staffing, but aligns with our model, and it includes very modest investments in key strategic priorities. It also doesn't change the tax rate if we do none of the investments. So I think we should be doing some investments making some investments in our strategic plan. That's a promise we made to our community, and or a commitment we made to our community, I should say. And it doesn't change. They don't change the tax impact in the end, considering the cap. And I would be very confident in scenario 1 if we were coming in and just they didn't have this CLA issue. But given where we are, I felt like we needed to show that we needed to actually be responsive to that impact. And okay, so with that, I'm going to kick it back to Nate. He's going to talk through some of the details, and we're close to the end of the presentation. We'll be able to open up for discussion.
Yeah, I won't spend a lot of time, but we're now on slide 28, and just as we promised we would do, we wanted to provide the board with some of the high-level ideas of what's coming out of schools with respect to how they have proposed spending their RISE themes. One key piece to understand is that as Tom discussed, a lot of the work and the thinking that went into these RISE proposals occurred prior to some of the late-breaking news here that is impacting our budget choices. And so we've already told principals that after the conclusion of the board's budget process, when we have determined what number we're going to put on the ballot, we are expecting principals to look at where we landed and just reconsider and make sure that their RISE proposals are the investments they want to pursue, in case anything has changed as a result of some of the scaled back investments that we're recommending at this time. But as you can see, elementary.
When you say principals, we also want them to go back to their school advisory group.
Yes.
So that's a kind of collaborative process.
Yes, exactly. So, you can see the major themes on there, including, we've talked a little bit about art here, and as you saw, our proposal that we're recommending right now keeps elementary art at a status quo level for a year, while we want to look more broadly at the unified arts kind of portfolio at the elementary level generally, so that we can come back next year with a more comprehensive approach to that. In the
and one thing I just want to make a point of there, the reason that we want to do that is because we want to make sure we're not making moves that cause unnecessary disruption year over year. And one of the things that we have been contemplating for some time is moving, we've gotten we have many more full-day pre-K programs, but pre-K does not run programming on Wednesdays. And so if we are to run 5-day, full-day pre-K, we will likely need UA support to be able to provide planning time for pre-K teachers during the week. And so we don't want to, and it's part of the guidance from you all, we don't want to make a decision now that then we have to come back to next year and reverse. We want to really be thinking out long-term.
So, right, so example here, elementary at both our magnet schools are considering having their art teachers be full-time instead of retaining those through RISE potentially. And you can see kind of the other themes here. One that, because we're short on time, I just thought was really interesting is the very last one on the list under the high school, the community building funds. Reading that proposal, that was exciting to me because it was kind of a pool of a portion of the RISE funds at the high school that was going to be kind of student-led decisions on how those funds would be deployed. So that means at this point we obviously don't know exactly what they will choose, but it just seemed, again, the whole theme of these RISE funds was to move the decision-making closer to our schools and our students, and it really can't get any closer than that. So I thought that was a pretty cool and exciting theme or idea that came out of the RISE.
And the approach we've taken with the RISE, we've taken with our principals and the school advisory groups and with you all, is that we don't overly monitor the RISE proposals and question the proposals that the school advisory groups bring to us, unless it's something like that's illegal to purchase or a school bus or something sort of off the wall. And we haven't had anything like that. People have been purchasing and budgeting what seem like really important student-centered, student-facing investments, and we want to make sure we continue to support that by not overly, I don't want to be micromanaging those school advisory group decisions.
Yeah, and we want them to take some chances. At the end of the day, if we are going to improve outcomes for students and find ways to save money at the same time, we're going to have to be a little more creative, a little more experimental, and so we want to make sure that we allow them the space to do that. I've talked about the audit slide here. We're on pace to have the formal audit wrapped up by the end of January, and so I'm sure we'll present that to the Finance and Facilities Committee as usual, but we covered this before. Our budget includes an assumed $2.4 million of audited fund balance money that will be supporting all the activities that we've described here. So that's one-time money that's in the budget. The next couple of slides, I will jump over. That's slides 30 and 31 that just highlight the major variables in the tax calculation. And I'll go to the ballot language. One other feature of the Act 127 was suspension of the ballot language that was prescribed in law. And so working with our attorneys, we have language here that we will be recommending, updating obviously the total budget figure with whatever we land on. This is essentially a simplified version of the previous question, so the language is largely the same, but it cuts out references to the education spending per equalized pupil, which doesn't exist anymore, and the percentage change in that number, and really just asks the voter the core question that we're asking them, which is, do you approve this amount of money to be the school's budget?
And that language looks like many of our neighbors' language.
Yep. And so next steps here, school board meeting next Tuesday, a week from today, to be preceded. We've just confirmed today by a brief presentation to the city council. So that's also happening on the 16th. We, I think if necessary, coming out of this meeting, potentially another committee meeting, Finance Facilities Committee, if deemed necessary, between today and next week's meeting. And then again, town meeting day vote on the 5th of March at the latest.
Great.
So we'll open it up to discussion.
Thank you, Superintendent Flanagan. Thank you, Executive Director Labrie, for this presentation and for the updated information. I know school board members, we've been receiving over the last 4 months, the budget information, but most notably in the last week, based on the new news from the state, the impact that it has on our budget. At this time, I'd like to open up the floor to any commissioners online or in person with any follow-up questions. Are there any? Commissioner Waltz?
I appreciate the curveball that you all have navigated. Knowing that the governor recently put some pressure on school boards to keep tax asks low, and knowing that the CLA is coming from the state, well, I guess I want to understand, could that be changed? I'm going to have a little magical thinking moment here. Could the governor be like, guys, go back to the drawing board, because there's a lot of towns that we're not the only ones that this seems incredibly unfortunate. But I also want to know what is about that money that I should be like, this is the right thing to do, to pay that portion. You know, like I feel like our town is still, or maybe finally recovering from the reappraisal jump on all of our property taxes, right? So, for the CLA, I mean, I don't understand. It sounds like the CLA is supposed to make it more equitable, and it's not like everybody, all of a sudden, things are worth more money and we're all gonna just sell and be rich somewhere. Like, we want to live here. So I want to know, with that, what that number is generating for the state, where is that money going? Why is it okay? Why can I feel good about that? Or give me a reason to feel good about it.
Well, I'll ask Nate to give you a reason to feel good about it, but you can do that.
No pressure.
You're like, pass.
But I think I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but sometimes I go there at the very beginning, and then Nate usually talks me down. So we've written to legislators and asked for their support here, and they understand the problem and are working to figure it out. And I think the first thing that I heard from one of them is that they're going to make sure that we're checking to make sure there's not a calculation error in the calculations. We don't think there is. Even if I thought there was initially, I don't think there is. But that is something that they are checking on, and so I think that the CLA may not be the place. The CLA is causing a problem, and I think will call into question the broader funding mechanism in our state. But I don't think that there's a fix to the CLA problem. It doesn't look like there's a fix to the CLA problem that's impacting districts all over the place right now. And so, yeah, so why don't you talk about this, the CLA and how it's designed to be equitable and sort of how that plays out.
I mean, I'd say the good news is the CLA is doing exactly what it was designed to do, right? Which is ensure that taxpayers, wherever they live in the state, are paying on the basis of the market value of their property, because the state knew and understood when it created the law that different towns would be at different points in their appraisal process. And just like in Burlington, before our recent reappraisal, we went many, many years before we had one. And our property's values for tax purposes were well below the market value. We all understood it then because it'd been so many years. What we've now experienced is significant price appreciation in a short period of time, which means that once again, the market value of properties, particularly residential properties in Burlington, is exceeded even those relatively recent new tax assessments. And that's what's driving this CLA number in Burlington and in Chittenden County more broadly, and in many other places in the state, is just the rise in the value of property, particularly residential property. Residential property price increases were also what resulted in the pain, if you will, from the last city process. It wasn't simply that they looked at everyone's property and said it's worth more. it was that residential property grew relatively more than commercial property, and therefore the tax burden essentially shifted more toward the residential side in Burlington. And that made that reappraisal process sting a lot more than people would have wanted or hoped for. Having said that, I think that, as Tom said, the CLA it's doing what it was supposed to do, although what it's doing and the way it was designed to work was say, if we think that your property is actually worth a lot more than your city's tax rolls say it's worth, we're going to increase your city's tax rate. And the problem it creates for a school district is we're now essentially responding, making programmatic kind of educational choices on the basis of something that has nothing to do with students or schools, or anything that we control, or anything having to do with schools whatsoever, right? It's like a real estate issue and it's putting us on the back foot. You could imagine, for example, that if the system had been set up to adjust the taxable value of the property, increasing the value of the property, right, to the equivalent fair market value for tax purposes, as opposed to increasing the tax rate, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It wouldn't change how much you pay, it just, it wouldn't put us on the defensive over the tax rate. This is really like, the CLA is creating a tax rate issue in the optic sense, how it looks. I think it's important to remember that even before all this CLA stuff emerged, we looked at that tax letter that went out and we all said, yikes, it's gonna be a tough budget year. So part of what we're dealing with here is.
Just to clarify for those online and in public, the tax letter from the state that was sent out December 18th.
December 1st.
December 1st,
Right.
that we and the superintendent distributed to us with a memo on the 18th about how that impacts us.
Exactly.
Which
Sorry to interrupt.
is an estimate of what the tax impacts are projected to be, and that number was 18%.
Yes.
Right.
Thanks.
So like, I just want to make sure like the CLA is creating a kind of 11th hour major problem for us, but another major problem is the really low yield, meaning that the education fund not having as much money to support activities generally drives tax rates up right from the gate. So we're already dealing with that. Now we have this on top of it. So I won't go any more like, get too wonky on it. Just to understand that like the CLA is a problem, although it's working as it's intended to do. It's creating fairness for taxpayers so that if you and I both live in a home that's fair market value is, let's say, $250,000 anywhere in the state, if our schools are choosing to spend the same amount essentially per pupil, we'll have the same tax rate. Doesn't matter that your home might actually, on the tax rolls, be listed for $250 and mine only be listed for, maybe mine's only listed for $150 because we haven't had a reappraisal in a while. The state's saying, no, you guys should both be paying the same amount. So it's working, doesn't make it any easier to swallow.
I do understand.
Thank you, Commissioner Waltz. I know.
Don't like it, but I get it.
Yeah. Commissioner Wick, followed by Commissioner Vanderputten.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Good work. Tough year. Toughest budget I've seen in the 8 years I've been involved. I think we can get all caught up in the technical mumbo jumbo of state ed finance, but the bottom line is, some of us may remember before we sent our state ed money to the government to be then sliced and diced and sent back to us, it was, if your school budget goes up 5%, your tax rate goes up 5%. It was very simple, but that was inequitable under, I guess, this case called Brigham. I forget, it was 20 years ago. But really, at the end of the day, I don't think we can blame the CLA or anything. A lot is beyond our control. What do I mean? Well, let's say just in round numbers, if our budget's $100 million and last year, and next year it's $115 million, that would, in simple terms, suggest a 15% tax increase. And in fact, this year, because of the slicing and dicing, including the CLA and all that, we're getting, is it 14%, 13.97. So it's actually pretty close to the actual increase, it strikes me, to our budget. But most of that is due to the bonding. And I think slide 27 with the pie chart is the best illustration of the increase. And the bonding is well over half. It looks like about 60% of the increase in our budget is the bond. And that, we all knew as a community, we approved the bond, and we know why we need a new high school, and it's painful, and it's not easy, but the rest of it is kind of not as big. If we didn't have to pay for this extra bonding, the rest of the pie chart, the pieces are kind of small. Not, I don't want to underplay them, but nonetheless, without the bonding, we wouldn't be having this same discussion. I'm not complaining about the bonding, but what I am saying is, thankfully, the legislature is talking seriously about construction financing for education again. That's not an easy issue. But most of this horrible increase this year is the bond, which we knew was coming, and I'm very much hoping that we'll all continue with our resolve to support the budget, because we're supporting the bond that we all passed and the high school that we're building. But it all kind of makes sense, and I think we can get caught up in all the state ed wonky-tonk, but really, I think if we just stick to dollars, what's our budget last year, what's our budget going to be next year, and what's the percent difference, and what's our tax impact going to be, and why, then we can understand it, and, I hope it's supportable. It's going to be painful for each and every one of us in the city of Burlington, but, I will support it.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. Commissioner Vanderputten.
Yeah, I have several really specific questions, and I'm asking myself if I'm going to ask them or not, just given time and the discussions that we've been having. But I come back to something that I said last year with this budget, which is that I am really concerned about the number of positions we have that we are funding that are non-student facing, non-student contact positions. And then the number of positions that are proposed for reductions, which definitely are. I see that one of them, for example, the psychologists, reducing that 1.0 FTE, it's vacant anyway. So you could say, well, there isn't anyone in that position. But when it comes to the others, and particularly I'd say any kind of guidance positions, and particularly guidance positions at our middle schools right now, I have a really hard time supporting reductions of positions where these are people assigned, and it's not really the people, it's the position assigned to work directly with students, when we have a very high number of people, and I am now specifically talking about coach-type positions who made it clear in curriculum and personnel committee meetings recently, where we were looking at the coach positions, that they do not work directly with students. And we're asked as a board to be data-driven in how we think about things. And every time we see the numbers for our literacy and math scores, and every time I think about how long we have had and supported permanently funded coaches in the district, I think, why are we not actually seeing a difference if they're making such a difference? Where we do have people making obvious differences when they're directly working with students. So I'm not there yet on this budget. I'm not there yet with scenario number 2 and the recommended investments. And maybe it's more appropriate if I ask my several specific questions about those investments as reminders another time. I could ask them tonight if it's better to ask it in public. I don't know.
I think our Superintendent Flanagan has shared that the percentage of the adding.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've looked at the percent of central office staff in Burlington compared to the percent of central office staff in other districts. It tends to be between 3 and 4%, and it's between 3 and 4% here. I think if you look at the pie chart and look at the investments, those are student-facing investments, right? And that's where we're making investments, and that's where the kind of the majority of the money is. And I think that I know that you still have a question about coaching and the efficacy of coaching. And so I understand that. And I think that's something that I feel we need in our district to continue to support instructional coaching. But I also understand that my opinion is not the only opinion out there. And I also know that even if we remove the coaching positions, we'd still need to reduce 40 teachers. And it wouldn't change, and just removing the coaching positions wouldn't change the tax impact. So I think I'm encouraging us to stay out of the lines and stay at the sort of governance level here around this. And I think you're doing that and saying that you want more driven toward student-facing investments. And we kind of tried to show that through the pie chart. The reductions, don't necessarily show positions, but could include positions. That $340,000 of central office department reductions, we need to work to figure out where those come from. They're going to come from across central office. And if you look at the guidance position, which you mentioned, that hits the core ratio is a 1.5 allocation to each middle school. Right now, Hunt has 2 guidance school counselors, and Edmonds Middle School has 1.5. The allocation is 1.5 of the core budget model. However, they are going to utilize RISE funds to retain the second guidance position. So we are actually funding student-facing positions through RISE in the way that the RISE was intended, right? Everyone gets the base allocation, but schools are mostly choosing in their RISE allocations to buy different things. If it was a different principal or in a different school, they may not choose to keep the 2.0 guidance. They may choose to bring in another interventionist. CP Smith's going to purchase an interventionist. So people are using those RISE allocations in different ways, but I'm sympathetic to the student-facing, to the importance of the student-facing positions. And I also really believe that if we don't invest in the professional development and professional growth of our educators, then which is hard to measure, and we're moving in the wrong direction, I think. So I think that's my general take, and just to go back to the fact that we are really pushing on student-facing investments, that's kind of the majority of what's going on here in terms of the overall scope. And we are working to be responsive to the concerns. So I pulled the coach out of the recommendation, the high school coach out of the recommendation, knowing kind of about those concerns. We pulled the deans out. Those were 2 positions that were helping us build capacity, leadership capacity across the district to be able to have a bench so that when we need principals, we have people who are prepared, and also to provide support at schools, but that felt like too much at this point. So that's some of the thinking that goes into scenario 2, is to really scale back some of those initial proposals. To add some RISE funding, a little bit of additional RISE funding for elementary schools. Those are going to be student-facing investments. So, yeah, I think that's sort of generally my thinking on it.
Thank you, Superintendent Flanagan. Commissioner Vanderputten, do you mind if I ask the rest of the room? Then we'll, if there's any follow-up. All right, online. Thank you. Commissioner Campriello.
I think I'm off mute. Thanks so much for the presentation and for the work that goes into this. And I just want to pull it back to Commissioner Wick's expression, because I wholeheartedly agree with his support of scenario 2. And frankly, it would be wildly unpopular to advocate for scenario 1 at this point, particularly from a taxpayer perspective. And so I'm not going to do that, but I am going to express my disappointment that we aren't in the fortunate position of fully being able to support scenario 1 because of the CLA. I think the investments and the thought and intentional approach that's gone into our budget build over the period of years that, at least that I've been present in these conversations, and certainly under Superintendent Flanagan's leadership, has been exactly that, thoughtful and intentional and pretty scrupulous. And there's not been fat in these budgets. And so I wish we're in a position to endorse scenario 1. I agree with pulling back on some of those investments to accommodate the really, really unfortunate news and impact the CLA will have. And I think back to Commissioner Wick's point, we are a community that has invested to the tune of overwhelming support in this high school project. And it's not something that we have, it's an investment that we all, I believe, want to make and are supportive of. And passing this budget is essential for us to move forward in both that project, but most importantly in educating the students and delivering the high quality services that we've committed to delivering. And so I would urge folks to support scenario 2 and find your way to that support if you're not there now. And we'll look forward to advocating with community members for that support as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Cambriello. All right. Anyone else with their hand up? All right. Commissioner Vanderputen, is there any follow-up?
There are two things I think that are really important. Can you remind me what the updated magnet school recommendations are? The 200,000 for that?
Yep. Yeah. So two things that we imagine that supporting. One is moving the existing half-time instructional coach at each of those schools to full-time. That'll cost approximately $50,000 per school, so that's $100,000 of the $200,000. And the other $100,000 would be split, $50,000 per school, to make other theme integration investments. That is a scaled back version of what the task force recommended, which was $100,000 per school and another $20,000 of one-time money in the first year. So we're now we've scaled that back to just $50,000 per school. It's a start, at least a step on that journey, but it was one that we thought we could at least afford to make some progress on with this recommendation.
Okay, so they'll have a full-time magnet school coach and a full-time coach at each of those schools?
Full-time instructional coach in addition to the full-time magnet coach, that's correct.
Mm-hmm. And can you please remind me what the restorative practice support would look like? And would these be licensed educators?
The RP support is not positions. So
Okay.
that's an allocation that we wanted to make sure that both for priority area 5 and priority area 4, there was a specific allocation of funding to be able to support activities there. So this would be a combination of things like stipends for educators who are a part of the restorative practices team at their school, to be a part of the restorative practices collaborative, or to do after-hours work there. And so there's some, that would be a combination of things, but that's not a position.
And one last question, and then I want to say something. Can you please remind me why we're adding an EL teacher despite declining enrollment?
To be clear, we've had that position for the past few years. It was an ESSER-supported position. And it's one of those positions that we had at the time because the level of need for those students dictated it based on, we have kind of a matrix of, based on WIDA scores of kind of and caseloads of what the assessment is. And we felt it was appropriate as well because a big part of why we went to bat for changes in the weighted pupil formula was so that we could afford to make some of these investments in some of our more marginalized students traditionally. So that's why we felt like that was an ESSER-supported position that we wanted to keep as part of this recommendation.
And even as enrollment has gone down, our multilingual learner enrollment has not gone down at that same number.
Okay.
It's stayed relatively flat. Yeah.
Can you, do you mind the long-term weighted, the acronym?
Long-term weighted average daily membership.
Can you tell us what, without Act 127, do you have that information? What our per pupil spending, I mean, roughly, or, based on the advocacy, what Superintendent Flanagan, again, I'm not highlighting our work, but how,
Like kind of what was the impact of it,
Yes.
so to speak? Yeah, I mean, because the funding formula has so many different variables, it's hard to truly do an apples to apples.
Right.
But roughly speaking, the transition to the long-term weighted average daily membership and the increased weights translate to a lower tax rate for any given level of spending. But an easier way to think about that is probably like, for a given level of spending, we probably could spend about $8 million more as a result of that change, right? So were it not for that change, we would be looking at a substantially higher tax rate. It's hard to kind of reverse engineer what that would be, but again, another way to think about it is kind of like $8 million worth of our spending is supported simply by virtue of that change, as opposed to requiring our community's taxpayers to generate that money.
so having been underfunded historically through the state based on no empirical data of their weighted system, we finally passed a law, Act 127, that absolutely mirrors other states in how they equitably fund their per pupil.
I don't know if I would say it mirrors other states. Our system's pretty unique, but with,
Formulas, like when we went to try and pass Act 127,
Right.
we gave examples, concrete examples of other states, how they fund their
Right.
per pupil weighting so that it again,
right, they
we
were
have nothing to stand
empirically
on.
derived
Yes.
weights. They weren't just simply the product of the need to make a law. They were actually driven by analysis,
Yes.
and I think it's been a
Analysis,
huge
I would
benefit
say. Sorry, yeah,
to our community already.
yes. Okay, thank you. Reappraisal. Many people have asked who have already seen the slide, is this due to real estate sales also impacting Vermont, having post-COVID, knowing that in the state of Vermont, our real estate, we've had some banner years for real estate sales?
Yeah, I mean, the CLA is entirely driven by that type of sales performance, if you will. So, and I think that, yeah, I can't say I'm not an expert in the real estate market, but short answer is yes. Essentially, it's the increase in the market value, which is reflected in all of those sales, and the fact that real estate has appreciated in terms of its price significantly over the past few years. So that's driving it, 100%.
And can we also talk about wages and benefits? This board has worked with all of our bargaining units, and we fortunately had 2 to 3 year contracts, which was in the last 10 years unheard of. We were going year by year. And our investment in our faculty and staff, coming off a 6% raise, 5% raise, and a 4.5, not all bargaining units, but it's all public knowledge. All of our contracts are online for the public to view. Those investments in our faculty and staff that you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation are what we stand by to attract and retain our faculty and staff here working in the district. And those are, that is our commitment. So wages, and then we talk about benefits. The state, on that December 1st letter, talked about healthcare increases by 17%. Again, we've talked about this in other meetings, but 17% in our healthcare costs. Those are numbers beyond our control. We can control what we pay our faculty and staff, and we invest in that, but the healthcare, we went to statewide bargaining to try to minimize the impact or the jockeying of rates and budgets for school districts, was my understanding. And we haven't seen those rates, those double-digit rates go down over the last couple of years. So that's a number that we cannot control. So I want to just make the public and commissioners who I know have spoken out about that, a reality in this budgeting process. And then the bond. Again, sometimes there's a misconception. We passed a bond that was 72% approval by the citizens of Burlington, but that was only the authority to borrow. So some actually thought we received the money at that bond vote, and that this year, unlike last year, even though we started spending the money, we did not need to take that borrowing, the bond, have a bond issued through our city government. But this year we have. So the $130 million is that $9 million impact to our budget this year. This school board and school district is not done in working with the state to be the only high school in the state of Vermont that's been shut down to incur our educational dollars to the tune of $9 million to a facility, to a building. So I implore, the school board, which I already have your sort of membership to do, but to look towards answers on supporting this Burlington School District on this great task of taxpayers affording this $9 million hit to our budget this year and continue over the next couple of years. So I recognize that and just want to call to attention that no other school district has that heavy weight. And thank you to the Burlington citizens. And I do believe they will support us as we start to borrow to make this a reality. And the reason for the large $130 million bond was because of the costs associated with the demolition and the construction and the year-out commitments to contractors. So the need for that large sum now is based on needs of the construction project. Other than that, I'm trying to think of if there's anything specifically to those scenarios. I know you did recognize, and I know at public comment we heard from Flynn Elementary, the RISE allocation, looking at those added for Smith, EES, Champlain, and Flynn, when those ESSER funds have gone away now, those schools, that is responding to those schools' needs for what I imagine is student-centered positions that's on top of what their RISE allocation is. Okay. And other than that, Commissioner Ivanchik, did you have your hand up from me? Sorry, you're still muted. You're still muted. Oh, now you're not. Say the question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Like Commissioner Wick and as well as Claire Wool mentioned that, when we got the 73% approval for the bond, that was just allowing us to go ahead with it. Now, this money is actually in the school budget vote. So this is when the money's coming out of, taxpayers' pockets. So this will be the question for our taxpayers, are you willing to pay this? I just had a clarifying question about the RISE allocation. I think we're in our third or fourth year of that. Just making sure that, so the RISE allocation from last year, so last year schools decided what they wanted. Those positions did not become part of the regular budget, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. So positions that were funded with RISE allocations, for example, that exist today, aren't automatically part of the budget that we're proposing here for next year. They're, once again, candidates to be included in the school-based decision-making process, and many schools are planning to continue those same investments in some of those positions. There'll probably be some changes as well, a few that will go away or that where the role will change. So they're not baked in here. The rise isn't kind of building upon itself. It's roughly $1.5 million, just about what it was last budget year, which is the year we're operating in right now. And so there will be some changes in how schools deploy those funds, but the positions that they have created with those funds haven't become permanent positions in the budget in any other way. Long term, if some school identified a very effective strategy, certainly that would be a conversation we would be having at the cabinet level as to whether or not we should make that part of our core model if something's proven really successful and we think it can be replicated across schools. But to date, we haven't done that.
And to the Commissioner Ivach's question, we didn't include all the stuff that was in ESSER that's going away in the reductions, but that's $26 million, which is the allocation we received over 3 years. So there are a number of positions in there, but not too many because we knew we didn't want to put too many positions because then we'd need to be reducing those positions in 3 years.
Thank you. Well, I think this has been a healthy discussion. Thank you for presenting all 5 scenarios. We welcome the public as well as those on the call tonight. This is public document. It can be found on our board docs, and we will also link it to once we look to that recommendation with feedback. As we get to next board meeting on the 16th, we will be presenting to the City Council at 5:30 on that Tuesday. But board members, we will talk about any other feedback that I might get via email for the superintendent over the next couple days, and potentially have another finance and facility meeting as needed, potentially on Thursday of this week before we send our recommendation to, or approve our recommendation for the presentation to City Council, and then to our final board meeting on the 16th. We will vote on ballot language and a budget number. And again, it's all listed in the slide. We do also, at that time, I know the public asked, how do we present all this information to the public? Every year we create a budget one sheet. We will put that out through Front Porch Forum, as well as our NPA, Neighborhood Planning Association meetings that will all meet and be represented in February, the school board members, to talk about the budgets and answer the public's questions and concerns. Any other? Commissioner Vanderpool.
I really appreciated the clarity with which Executive Director Lavery explained everything tonight. Is there a way to make like a video, sorry to put you on the spot, or a narrated PowerPoint that could be posted to the school website?
10 minutes of fame.
And seeing as you were recorded tonight, all you need to do is memorize the script and do it a second time.
They already exist then.
Well, I want to get proper hair and makeup.
From tonight. Anyway, I just want to say that was very important and very helpful because it's really complex, and you did a great job of breaking it down. So any way we can do that, I think, would be helpful to help people understand these numbers.
I agree. And we do not, by any means, make any assumptions that we will receive the support that we have in the past for our school budgets. But I will say, as a school board chair and board, along with the superintendent, our fiscal responsibility is first and foremost a priority, as well as educating our students. And we do recognize our enrollment. We understand decisions that impact financially impact us. And we appreciate also investment, as Commissioner Campriello spoke to, our strategic plan, and hearing from our educators, and the approach that we take to budgeting with our individual schools, giving you direct feedback from their advisories. That's how we are able to create the teamwork that we have in all these conversations. So thank you, everyone, for participating and for tonight's dialogue, and we look forward to updating you on next steps and the public and meeting here again next Tuesday on the 16th to finalize our recommendation and our approval of the budget.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Mike.